Is vaping safe?
Well, smoking tobacco is the leading preventable cause of death, and we know that in the UK approximately 100,000 people die every year as a direct result of smoking. So in comparison to smoking tobacco, vaping can be considered to be much safer. A landmark report produced by Public Health England in 2015 reviewed all the available research evidence at the time and suggested that in comparison to smoking tobacco, vaping is 95% less harmful to health. So following that report, we now have guidance to doctors, to stop smoking professionals that suggest if people want to stop smoking and choose to use an e-cigarette, that they should be supported to do that as a safer alternative to smoking. And even for groups that are particularly concerned about potential harms of vaping, so for example pregnant women, we now have guidance that suggests that if they choose to give up smoking by vaping, they should be encouraged to do so as a safer alternative. Clearly the best option, the safest option, would be not to vape and not to consume any potentially addictive substance at all. But in comparison to tobacco smoking, vaping is certainly the safer alternative.
Are there toxic, cancer-causing chemicals in the e-liquid?
Well, there have been news reports about possible links between some of e-liquid flavourings and cancer-causing properties or carcinogens. A lot of these news reports have been really over-sensationalised. There is some available evidence just emerging and based on laboratory studies in animals mainly that has linked some particular compounds in particular flavourings to properties that would cause irritant to the lungs. So in particular we know that the butterscotch flavouring and cherry flavourings might be ones that you want to avoid. But I think it is important to emphasise that these are studies based on laboratory experiments with animals. So we also have evidence from real life settings. A recent study conducted at UCL found that real world toxicant exposure, so exposure to harmful cancer-causing chemicals, was no different amongst people who chose to vape than amongst non-smokers. So our advice based on emerging evidence would be that you should take a cautious approach and certainly avoid any particular flavourings for which research evidence shows might be lung irritants. These flavourings were originally designed as food-grade flavourings. They were never designed to be inhaled into the lungs, so it's right to take a cautious approach. However, we wouldn't recommend that if you've stopped smoking by vaping, that it's better to go back to smoking. It's certainly not. It's certainly less harmful to health to continue to vape than to go back to smoking.
What are the risks of exposure to second-hand vape?
Well, a recent study conducted under very extreme conditions in a vape shop where there was lots of vape that stayed in the atmosphere actually found no direct evidence to show that bystanders had any impact from being exposed to that second-hand vape. In a real-world setting, vape certainly doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long as tobacco smoke would, so any exposure is likely to be much less prolonged than exposure to tobacco smoke. And there is no evidence that we have at the moment to suggest that that brief exposure to second-hand vape has any impact on health at all.
How can vapers get involved in research?
Well, we really want to hear the views of people that have given up smoking by vaping, whether or not they find that they've gone back to smoking. So you can look at our website, which is ecigresearch.uea.ac.uk. There's an online survey that you could complete, and we'd really like to hear from you.